Some of y'all act like you don't ever cry. You a lie. You might cry in privacy, but you still cry. I have a daughter. I didn't tell this story because she was here at 9, but I'll tell it since she's gone. Jillian, she's one of those people who doesn't like to cry in front of everybody. You know, she will hold her cry in for 40 minutes. You forgot the incident that happened. And then 40 minutes later, she'd be like, so girl, what are you crying about? One time she was doing gymnastics out at her gym. She had a private lesson, and I was sitting out in the car waiting for her to get done, and the coach sent me a text that Jillian just took a hard fall. Come in. So I'm rushing in there. Lord have mercy. He told me what she did, how she flipped and landed on her back, and he was stretching her out and making sure she was okay. We were deciding whether or not we needed to go to urgent care or the ER, and she was like, no, I'm okay. It was hard. I'm okay. I got it. I said, we were like, sure. We sat in there for 20 minutes stretching her, making sure she was okay, and the coach said, well, I think she's all right. She walked around, and she didn't fall out or anything. So she went and got in the car, opened the door, put her bag in the car, sat down in the seat. I went to start the car, and I thought that it was the car starting, but all the noise was Jillian talking about, I said, girl, what you doing? She didn't want to cry in front of the coach. Jillian's not going to let you see her cry, but she will, and some of y'all are like that too. Nobody knows that you cry. I know they say, well, women cry more than men. It's true. Y'all do. Y'all do. The research says women cry, it's true, real research, 5.3 times a month. That's true. Somebody said, well, I got 3 more this month. That's good. Men cry 1.3 times a month, on average. So y'all cry 5 more times a month than we do. Don't look at me, Coco, like that. I know you. This is what research says, right? But even the strongest, hardest, toughest man, sooner or later, will find that life will deliver you something that makes you cry. Crying is an external manifestation of an internal emotion. Even the toughest among us is prone to having a good cry when life gets too tough, even for the tough folk to handle. And so in this text that I read today, we read about some really tough guys who have been given something to cry about. David and his men have returned home from fighting countless battles throughout the land. These are some of the strongest men in this region of the world. But when they arrive home, they find that their city has been burned to the ground. Their homes, their businesses, their house of worship, all destroyed. And as if that were not enough, their wives, their sons, their daughters, their baby girls were all kidnapped and taken away to some foreign land. Now right there, that's something to cry about. And they did indeed cry. The text says David and his men, this is not women, these are all men, wept aloud. Y'all know that loud cry when the neighbors hear you crying? And they called 911, said somebody better come check on the people next door. They wept aloud until they had no strength left to weep. These strong warriors, these fighting men, real tough guys, are brought to their knees and found bawling like little bitty babies. They cried so hard, so loudly, and so long that they had no more strength left in their bodies to cry anymore. Anybody ever cried until you couldn't cry anymore? You don't have to say amen, just wink your right eye. Anyone ever cried until you cried yourself to sleep? Last thing you remembered when you were laid down as you were crying? Have you ever cried to the point that you were too weak to cry anymore? If so, then you will relate to David and the other men in this text. Church, there is a lesson. There's a lesson in this text for all of those who've had the kind of life experience that really gives you something to cry about. For if you will study the text with me today, you will see that David did not spend the rest of his days crying, thank the Lord. The text says that he and the men cried until they couldn't cry anymore. But after all the tears had dried from the eyes, David decided to do something to change his crying and sad situation. And you know, it's right here where some of us get stalled in life. When something tragic happens in our life, we often fail to advance beyond the crying stage. You see, at some point, you really need to do what your mama told you to do. Stop all that crying. Stop all that crying and take some action to improve your sad situation. So what do you do when life gives you something to cry about? That's particularly powerful. It's an especially important question for all of us today. Those of us who live in this city, in this community. For just this week, Friday night, life has given us as a community something new to cry about, as though we didn't have enough to make us cry. As many of you know, the all too pervasive issue, the issue of the use of fatal force against black folk, has hit us right here at home. Again, a police officer has killed another black man, presumably an unarmed black man, right down the street from where you're sitting now. We don't know a lot of details right now, so we don't want to overreact, and we don't want to act on what we don't know. But there are some things that we do know. We know that a father is dead. We know that a son, a brother, is gone. We know that there's a pattern, a national pattern of using deadly force when it comes to policing black communities. A pattern that shows that this happens more to black folk than other folk. That's a fact. We know that. We know this man comes from a good and a God-fearing family. We know that. Even if you didn't know Terence Crutcher, a lot of you know his daddy and you know his mama. Even if you don't know them personally, you probably know their ministry and their music, and you know their service to this community. So we know this community has been hurt by this recent tragedy. In fact, here at the Metropolitan Baptist Church, we probably know this family better than a lot of families know this family. For a little over 4 years, Reverend Brother Joey Crutcher served as the minister of music in this church, and it was his son who was shot and killed by the police officer Friday night. For years, he taught parts, led this music ministry, traveled all over the country, spreading the good news through preached word and through song of a risen Savior, and today he mourns a son who was taken away from us all at 40 years old. We know that this son, Terence Crutcher, who was killed just the other day, we know that he was an incredibly gifted singer. In fact, when we hosted a citywide music workshop with the composer V. Michael McKay, one of the songs that the choir sang at one of those workshops was, "I've got a reason to clap my hands. I got a reason to sing and dance." And the man that was chosen to lead that song at the musical that culminated from the 3-day workshop was none other than Terence Crutcher, who was shot and killed on 36th Street North on Friday night. He'll never sing that song again. We won't hear him again. We know that. We also know that incidents like these cause outrage. They cause high emotional tensions. They cause us to cry out as a community, why does this keep happening? Why does it keep happening anywhere? But why does it seem to continue to happen so much where we live? I received 2 calls yesterday. First call yesterday morning from our mayor, who wanted to inform me about the incidents and wanted to inform me that justice will be done, and they are investigating this, and they're going to treat this with the greatest level of sensitivity and concern for not only the loss of life there, but for the whole community. That's from the mayor. And then later today, I get a call from the district attorney's office, Steve Kunzweiler, and he says, Pastor, I'm calling you and other North Tulsa leaders because I know that you will want to hear from us, and I want you to know that we are treating this case carefully. We are going to be sure that justice is done. We will not allow this to be swept under the rug. We're going to be transparent and straightforward. You know I can't give you all the details right now, but I want you to know that we're working on this. Why did the mayor and the district attorney call pastors all over North Tulsa, like myself? Because they know, like you and I know, that there are some very legitimate concerns about what might happen in response to the death of another black man at the hands of another police officer. They know that oftentimes our crying and our tears and our outrage leads us to act in ways that frankly are very destructive in our own communities. They know the case of a place like Ferguson where our weeping and our outrage led to violence and destruction, frankly violence and destruction that only happens within the already negatively impacted community. What we know is we don't want that. We don't want that for Tulsa, Oklahoma. Yes, we want to cry. Yes, we want to be outraged. Yes, we want to protest. Yes, we want to call for transparency. Yes, we want to insist that justice is done. And we want to stop this cycle of killing. But what we don't want to use this as an opportunity to make a bad situation worse. We don't want that as much as we don't want to perpetuate the injustice that has us crying our eyes out. And so today, I want to offer for us what I see as David's response. David's response, which might be framed as a three-point strategy for what you do when something like this happens in your community. What you do when you receive the news of loss and destruction where you live. What you do when life gives you something to cry about. What do you do when crying time is over? I think we can frame David's response in terms of these three stages. What do? First, you got to regroup. Somebody say regroup. Then you refocus. Say refocus. Finally, you resolve. Yeah. The first thing David does after all the crying is done is David decides, I got to regroup. David realizes that he needs to get himself together. He and his men have had an intensely emotional experience. They are mad as they can be, and they ought to be mad. They've been wronged by the enemy. They are feeling violated. They are feeling extremely agitated to the point where they wept until they literally could not weep anymore, didn't have the strength to cry.